Good evening, guys. We got a little change of scenery for you today. We're in my workshop, and the reason we're here is because today we're going to work on handling this knife. Now, I made this knife in another video, so if you check out my Around the Forge series, making the knife, this is the knife that we made, and we're going to put a handle on this. So stay tuned. We'll get all the supplies together, talk about it, and we'll show you the process. Alright guys, so I just grabbed a piece of wood that I had laying around. I actually use this a lot as a baton to baton pieces of wood when I was around my house if I was doing any kind of projects. But we're actually going to use this today to make our handle. So initially what we want to do is, I don't want this bark on, so I'm going to shave all this bark off with my knife, and once we get that good and cleaned, then we'll talk about how we're going to actually decide where we're going to baton this piece of wood to make a handle for each side. Okay, so we took all the bark off this small piece of wood, and what we want to do next is, before we baton this, we want to measure how far down on this piece of wood we actually want our handle to be. And the reason we're going to do that is, it'll be easier to baton a smaller piece straight than if we have a long piece, so we don't get off and carve it at an angle or anything. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just grab a pen out of here and check where my blade's laying against this, and just mark right at the bottom. And then I'm going to flip it around just so I have two reference points, and I'm going to mark again. Now, where my marks are on this, there's still a little bit of bark, so I'm going to touch that up. But first, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to get out my folding saw, and I'm actually going to cut this top piece right off this lower piece that has the knot. Okay guys, so we cut our piece of wood, and as you can see, it's quite close to the length of the handle that I would want on this. It's a little bit longer, but there's no problem whatsoever. Once we epoxy this on, we're going to trim up the sides, so it's not going to cause a problem at all. So I don't want to just cut this piece in half, because it's too big of a piece. If I would epoxy it onto my knife, it's just too big of a handle. So we need to decide how we're going to split this. We're actually going to split two sides of this. And when you look at wood, you're always going to see, and I'm going to show this up close in a second, some of the growth rings are going to be tighter on one side than the other. And the tighter side, compared to the wider side, depends on where the tree is located and where the sun would rise and set in north or south hemisphere. So just, that's a little side note there. So what we're going to do to decide on how we're going to split this, we want to place our knife on the piece of wood, and I'm looking, as you can see up close, there's a small crack there, so we want to try to stay away from that as much as possible. So I'm actually going to take the bottom of my knife and see where that fits on my piece of wood, and I'm going to try to do this so you guys can see it. So we don't want to be here, because this way, I'm going to hold the knife this way, if we would do it this way, there's part of the knife's off. So we actually want to do it that enough of the knife is covered by the wood. So we want, on this side, a little bit of wood, on this side a little bit of wood, and it's okay if there's a little bit on the bottom, because we're going to trim that up. So I'm going to measure that up here, and what I'll do is, once I set this on something, I'm going to take my pen, and I'm just going to mark behind my knife where I actually want to cut that at, or I'm sorry, in front of my knife. So I'm trying to just stay out of the way while I do this for you guys. Do it this way. So we're going to measure it up, and draw our line. And that's going to be my first cut. So as you can see, I drew my line there. And what we're going to use our knife, and and we're actually going to baton this piece of wood. Now when you baton a piece of wood, you need to look how the grain pattern runs. If it runs out, if it runs in, and you want to position your knife accordingly. But to be on the safe side for this project, I'm actually going to angle my knife in. So it's okay when it first starts to cut in if we get a little extra. We just don't want it to be a little less, because that way we're going to have an uneven handle. It's okay if it's uneven on the bigger side, because we can always sand that down or carve that down to fit. So we're going to start by batoning with our knife angled inward a little bit, because we want as much of this as we can keep on there. Now the baton I'm using here actually came from my grandfather. It was hand carved. Just want to take our time, make sure everything's lined up here. And what I like to do, it's almost like measuring. If you can set this up once, check it twice, and then begin. I like to give it an initial hit, see where I'm at. So I was a little bit off on that one. So I want to reset that. Split it down. So that's what we came up with. So as you can see, I'm going to set it up backwards. We have a little bit of overhang on each side, which that's no problem whatsoever. Now when we split it out, you can see there's a little unevenness in here. So all that we're going to do is take our time and carve that down nice and flat. And any edges that we need to take care of, we will. So I'm going to sit and work on this piece. We're going to do the same on the second half. I'll point with the knife on this section for the other half of the handle, and then we'll get back to you as soon as we get that done and we get our faces cleaned up. We'll show how we're going to epoxy that on. So stay tuned. Okay, so both handles I batoned off the initial piece of wood that we started with, and they came out quite well. So what I did was, to get them to lay more flush with my knife blade, was I just took my knife and smoothed them out, because they were a little bit jagged from batoning. It didn't cut straight through. So the next step in this process is going to be actually to epoxy these handles on to my knife. So I'm not too worried. I'm going to do this backwards so you can see. I'm not too worried if there's overlap here, or extra overhang here, I'm sorry. The reason why is because once this is epoxied, I'm actually going to take this and I'm going to carve this down with another small jackknife, or if I had a rasp or a file or sandpaper, just to even all this out. So I'm not too concerned with that, and I'm not going to try to line this up too much. I'd rather that overhang be there. What I'm more concerned about with this process is finding where I want my handle to end in comparison to the blade. Now, the only thing you need to keep aware with this is if I would think, hey, I want it to end here, and there's a lot of bottom hanging out, then of course maybe you want to slide that down. But if not, you can always cut that metal off. I would do that before you glue it though. But in my case, it's going to fit just about perfect. So I'm going to make sure that that's lined up. Once I glue this first piece, I'm going to use just some small clamps. You can use rope, you can use string, anything to tie that down and let that set up. I have 5-minute epoxy here. It's 2-part epoxy. So I'm going to spray some of this out. I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to put a thin layer on. I'm going to put my first handle on, get it aligned how I want it, let it dry for a short time. I'll probably give it about 10 minutes. We'll stop the video between there, and then we'll put the second handle on and let that set up. Once those two handles are set up, then we will shave down the sides. So 2-part epoxy, of course, it's pretty straightforward how you're going to do this. You're just going to take just a scrap piece of paper here, and epoxy, all that you want to do is, you, of course, squirt some of this onto the paper. I like to put the lid back on right away so it doesn't dry up on me. And then we want to mix. I'm just use a Q-tip. We're just going to mix our two parts together, and that'll form our sealer and our glue. start with that, and I'm going to put this on both my knife blade handle, and I'm also going to put this on my glue. So we're getting a good coat on there. And we want to get a good coat on our handle. And I would say you don't need to be too sparing with this. If you need a little bit extra, get a little bit extra on there. You're not going to go wrong by getting some extra glue in there. I just wouldn't go so overboard with it that it starts to leak out the sides, because you don't want to have to deal with that. Got another Q-tip. Just mix this in, make sure we're getting all the way out to those edges. Get a good seal on this. Alright. Now, what we want to look at is there's a larger part and a smaller part of this handle, the way it's split out. So I want that smaller part towards the top. So we're just going to lay that on. And it's going to be a little bit slippery because you're using this glue. And I want to get that set just how I want it. So once I get that set, I'm going to use my 2 clamps. And again, you can use string for this if you would want to. I'm just going to use these clamps because, like I said, I'm in my shop. I'm not out in the woods doing this. Now, as an alternative, I like to offer alternatives all the time, because what if you were in a self-reliant situation, maybe you didn't have some of these pieces of equipment. Well, first of all, the string can work as the clamps. You can also use pine pitch, which we can do another video on how to make pine pitch for this. So you just want to take your time, make sure they're lined up where you want them. And once I get these clamped on, I'm actually going to go around the edges and wipe up any glue that snuck out on me. Look around, make sure it's where I want it. This piece here I actually want to slide out a little bit further, just like that. Start to reclamp. Just watch it so it doesn't slide as I clamp it. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with how that is right now. So I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to set this on my vise. I'm going to let this dry. Once it dries, I'm going to flip it over, glue my second piece on, and then we'll get back to you how we're going to finish that off, and we'll go from there. So we have our handle now. It's glued onto our knife, as you can see, and there is some overlap in this handle. So how we're going to take care of that, it's quite simple. I'm actually going to just use a razor knife here, and you don't want to dig in too deep because you don't want to split your wood into your handle. So you want to just take your knife, find some high points, and just start to work. And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Right in here, as you can see, there's a little bit of a lip. You don't want to just dig into that in case the grain runs too far down on your handle. So I want to actually reverse the knife and start to work this way a little bit with it. Now, you don't have to use, of course, a razor knife for this. You can use a small jackknife or anything. You want to just keep working with this, changing your angle, making sure you're getting nice clean cuts until you get even with the rest of your handle. Once you get that done, you can take a little bit of sandpaper or a file and file this edging down to smooth it out, and then you'll have your handle quite set here on your knife blade. So I'm going to work on this a little bit. I'll show you what it looks like then when I'm done. So I finished whittling out the rest of my handle, and as you can see, I got it nice and flush with the profile of the handle, the blade profile of the handle, and it fits my hand quite well at this point. So what are we going to do to finish this knife off? Well, there's really not too much. I can actually let it like this if I'd want to. I just need to protect the wood. But what I want to do is I actually want to dress this up a little bit. So I have an old stain bottle, and what I did was, if you look back at my videos recently, I did a walnut dye video. I put some black walnut dye in here, and I actually cooked it down before I put it in here, so it's pretty concentrated. So give it a little shake. I'm going to add it onto a rag. I'm just going to work that into the handle to give my handle some color, as you can see. So I'm just going to work that in good. Just like that. If there's any spots that aren't absorbing dye, it might be because there's some epoxy on there. So I'll deal with that with a little bit of sandpaper, or I'll get my knife out and I'll carve that piece out. I'm just going to work this in, and this is of course going to absorb in, and some of it's going to wipe off as I do it. So I just want to work that in good. Put a second coat on. We're going to let this dry. And I can show you guys for now what the final product is going to look like. That's my knife, handled, and like I said, we're going to leave it as it is for now. And the good sharp blade, I'll probably touch it up with the diamond rod a little bit more, keep honing that as I go. And we'll pick this video up in the next part that we're going to actually make a sheath so we can carry this around. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to keep making videos similar to this. So until then, thanks guys.